What up, y'all? I'm Dr. CBS, here with my girl, Dr. Layla Brown, and you're tuned into season 2, episode 15 of The Last Dope Intellectual.
All right, y'all. So before we get into this week's Shoot the Shit, we want to shout out our new patrons. We have Sebastian Kimbert, Philip Moss, and Kalik. Thank you all so much for your money and for helping us to pay our producer. All right, so this week, we wanted to shoot the shit about something a little bit more general that will kind of dovetail our interview this week. So we're interviewing Yannick Marshall. And so what inspired this was a piece that apparently he wrote for Black Perspectives, which is entitled, There's No Relatively Benign Form of Settler Colonialism. And he says in the interview with Millennials Are Killing Capitalism that this piece was inspired by this class he was forced to take on Canadian politics, where he was essentially told that Canada was better than the US, in particular because of the way that it handled its relations with Indigenous people, right? And so one of the things that came up for me when I was listening to that, one of the things that struck me about that was the way other countries in the Western Hemisphere compare themselves to the US to say, well, at least we're not the US, right? So in this case, in the case of Canada, they're saying at least we're not the US in relationship to the settler colonial project of Canada in relationship to the Indigenous population. It's something that I encountered all over Latin America, in particular on the question of race. And so what I wanted to generally sort of shoot this shit about is to think about, what does it mean to have the US as this, well, at least we're not them, right? And what type of work does that do? What has it done? What is it still doing? What are you all's thoughts about this?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because on the one hand, there's all of this critique of like American exceptionalism. Like we don't need to exceptionalize the US. We don't need to always have Americocentrism, so centering the United States. But at the same time, what people are doing with that type of discourse that you laid out is exactly exceptionalizing the US, that the US is the archetype of racism, imperialism, settler colonialism. And the US is all of those things, right? And more, right? Warmongering. But it is not unique in the sense that it did not originate these things, right? So for example, Oliver Cromwell Cox talks about how the US is a lusty like child of already developed capitalism. They inherited a system, right? And are continuing it in their own regime of domination, but it's not as if the US is singular. And what it does is it allows for to have the US as a model of these forms of domination. It allows these other equally pernicious, equally devastating, equally dehumanizing and violent forms to sneak in the back door because it doesn't look like what the US looks like, right? And so, you can hold up Black people getting their ass whooped by the cops or shot by the cops in the US and say, well, our police don't do that. Meanwhile, your police are doing similar types of things, even if they don't carry guns, for example, right? Or by contrast, police are just straight up shooting people down, like political protesters or political activists down in the street in ways that sort of differ from the U.S. And so when the U.S. becomes the sort of model and the kind of apotheosis of whatever form of violence, then it allows for other forms of violence to continue because it doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it reminds me, even within the U.S., of the whole North-South dynamic, right? So the South has been used historically, and even today to some extent. I don't think it's as effective anymore, as that's where all the bad white people are, and then the North is this wholesome place for Black folks. We know that's a bullshit narrative. Like Malcolm famously said, anything south of the Canadian border was the South, as a way to just say like. I think he said Romney in Michigan at the time, Romney is a Dixie governor. Like all of these people are part of that shit. And he talked about how the Democrats and the Dixiecrats, who were all in the same party, were parlaying together. So you have the same thing internationally, where the U.S. is used as a boogeyman, similar to how they use the South, by other settler states to say, well, we're not as bad as them. But even though we're still on stolen land, even though slavery was still, very important to the building up of wherever we are, even though we're still engaged in capitalism, even though racism, even if it doesn't function exactly how it functions in the US, is still here and very much part of how the society works. We're not them. And it's always this sense of trying to get colonized people to accept an extremely low standard of living. So anything else is always like, well, maybe that's a little bit better because we've already colonized you. It's already conquest. That part has been resolved. We're not touching that. But, maybe we'll let you have a little bit more space to run around in the colony. But the colony does not disappear. The colony stays. The colony is forever present. But maybe the colony can improve. And I've been talking to people about this a lot, how especially during Black History Month, a lot of the first Black stuff that y'all hear me complain about is often celebrating like a better existence in the colony. you know. So with settler colonialism, in whatever context, whether we're talking about in Canada, like Yannick talked about in that clip, or whether we're talking about in in so-called Latin America or Southern America, or whatever, like it's always functioning, and capital is still in rule. And I think that's the part that we have to focus on, not maybe the different intricacies of how it might get the job done. I mean, slavery was similar too. Like every colonial empire didn't do slavery the same way, but they did slavery. You know, so that should be the point for me.
It reminds me of this quote. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me of this quote from Ambedkar, where he talks about there are no like good slave masters, and there are no like kind slave masters. There are good people, and then there are slave masters. And so, we shouldn't be parsing out our oppression in that way, like it's not. And it's interesting that you said, that Malcolm quote, because even the way that Malcolm sets that up would again make it seem like Canada, saying that anything south of Canada is the South. Well, shit, the Canada. So maybe anything south of the moon, because Canada, the South too, is the point, so.
Right.
No, I mean, and also, I think what initially stuck out to me when I was thinking about the comparison between Canada and Latin America is that so much of that we're not them it isn't even just a question of scale. And so it becomes not just a question of scale. It completely obscures these histories, right? So, what happens across Latin America almost entirely is that, because they are able to say, well, we don't do race like the US, then race is non-existent. That Black people do not exist, right? And so, I mean, and I know we're in a slightly different place in history. I mean, most people who read a little bit about the rest of the world are aware of the fact that Black people do indeed exist everywhere in the world. But so much of Latin American studies and African diaspora studies in the Latin American context over the last 20 years has literally been a struggle over saying Black people exist there, right? And this is interesting, I think, in contrast to the conversation we had last week about the fact that 90% of enslaved Africans went to Latin America and the Caribbean. And so how do we then get to this place where we say Black people don't exist, therefore race doesn't exist, therefore Black people don't exist, and racism doesn't exist, right? And so it becomes this sort of, I don't know, it has a snowball effect, right? That it's not just we're not as bad as them, but you can't even claim that the disparities that you are experiencing are on the basis of these things, and not just race, right? Then it becomes a way of saying that slavery itself didn't happen, right? So there are all of these histories that become obscured, and so the grounds on which people are even fighting their contemporary oppression and exploitation is so unclear because there's no connection to what the historical material reality is.
And so too, like, you mentioned last week as well, I think you did, Jemima Pierre's book, Predicament of Blackness. I think it's a similar type of thing on the African continent where racism exists. Just because it's Black people doesn't mean that racism or the logics of white supremacy are not operating, right? And so I think that part of what we're talking about is that these are global systems that have particular types of articulations, but they're global systems. So capitalism is global, imperialism is global, racism and anti-Black racism, these are all global phenomena. And just because they have particularities doesn't mean that one is better or worse, right? And also the measure can't just be like death, right? Or killing people. there's a whole host of violence in between, their life, right, and death. And I think all of those things need to be taken into consideration. But this is also like I think class analysis is really important as well, because that's how you bring into view like the comprador classes, like the petty bourgeoisie, and all the people who are very much invested in these global systems of domination.
I know when we were talking about this before we got on, Sharice, you were talking about, so what we talked about so far has been in the context of what we know to clearly be either settler colonies or former colonies. But I know you even mentioned some of the ways that it occurs in Europe in the sort of colonial metropoles. And I wondered if you could expand on that a little bit more.
Yeah. So even sort of, former European powers or previous, imperial powers like Great Britain or France will do the same shit, where it's like, well, our method of colonialism was different than the US method, or we weren't as exploitative, or we weren't as extractive, or we didn't dominate other Europeans, how they, the US, because the US dominates everybody. It's very peculiar. I will not say it's like exceptional, but it's very peculiar because the U.S., like the Marshall Plan, was a colonial type of model imposed on Europe, right? For a number of reasons, but like the U.S. doesn't give a fuck. Like, it's the dollar and it's the U.S. period. And of course, Glenn laid a lot of this out in his work, and so. But again, so when France makes these arguments, or Great Britain makes these arguments, or Italy or whomever else, it again allows for an obfuscation of their very violent, very long colonial and imperial histories.
Sorry, the library people were bothering me. If I get cut off, anyway. The white lady.
You better tell Yoli to guard the door. Shit.
Wow. That's not making a recording. No, I mean, I think the way that
you messed him up, CBS. You got him thinking about his boo.
No, it's the people who annoy me, actually. But no, the way that the different colonial empires like play that game. I mean, I had just been reading through the Black Jacobins, and reading through Horn's book on that too here recently, and you had all those competing interests even then. So like you think about during the Haitian Revolution, it wasn't just the French. You had the British Empire, the Spanish Empire, and they were all jostling, and they were making different offers. And depending on which history you go by, some people within the Haitian world fought with different colonial empires, or even you think about in America when or what becomes America eventually, but the colony of America at the time is still a colony, but then it's fighting with the British. But then some of the slaves joined the British for freedom. Like, we're always having to negotiate this as the colonized people. As someone offers up, maybe here's a few more crumbs next to the other colonizer. And I think that's just the reality what you deal with when you're under colonialism. Like, you don't have since you don't have self-determination, you don't have autonomy, you don't have sovereignty in the sense, you're constantly being dominated, you have to deal with that. But what we have to do to navigate that should never be confused with like actually ending the colony, like that activity. So yeah, maybe we did fight with the British in America, or maybe we did fight with the Spanish periodically in Haiti or somewhere else, right? Like, that's possible, but that does not mean that those are the people who we should side with in the long run. Like, you do what you got to do, right? Like, Haiti did what it had to do. We all do what we got to do to survive, but that ain't the ultimate goal. And I think often these things get confused as the thing.
No, I mean, I guess the other thing that I was thinking about too is that when we displace all of the violence on the United States, for example, it allows for the people to abdicate their responsibility to struggle against their government and to struggle against the forms of domination in their, where they're located, because it's like, oh, well, that's what's happening in the US. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, Black people are not getting shot by the cops in Canada, and therefore we don't have to mobilize. There's a hell of shit to mobilize around, and you still have a responsibility to struggle always. And so even the people, like when the people believe that mythology, or the people believe, the greater or lesser evil, it also has a mollifying effect in that way.
Yeah, one of the things that I also appreciate, even about the framing, right? The notion that there's no relatively benign form, I think is even something important for us to think about, because I think sometimes even just when we're trying to explain things, right, we might say something like that just in an attempt to offer some kind of clarity or some kind of specificity. But for me, what I appreciated about that is the reminder to not perpetuate that narrative, right? It's the same way that like I struggle when I teach classes in Latin America. Like one of the things that they often argue about slavery in the Latin American context is that because the Catholic Church permitted racial intermixture in a way that the Protestant church did not, that it was somehow a relatively, less harsh form of slavery. But slavery is slavery, right? And so we can talk about the various forms of brutality, but I think what is important in that reminder for me is to always be clear about the fact that no matter how it's practiced, what the specificities are, that the theft of freedom and whatever comes with that is the basis of that issue. And that even if we're trying to explain what the particular specificities are in one place or another, we have to remember that they are a part of these sort of larger systems and structures. And I appreciated that about I think the reminder in that conversation.
And also, like, we can distinguish between our colonizers, but we don't need no order of operations. Like, they're all trash. So we don't need to do better or worse. Just like it reminds me of like the direct rule versus indirect rule versus Luso-tropicalism, like which one was better. It's all trash. And so again, we can have distinctions and we can have contextual and historical specificity because we need to be sort of scientific in our approach. But ain't no hierarchy, ain't no ordering. All of them are trash and all of them gotta go, period.
Yeah, I think it was just pulling up this quote. Yeah, Fanon said the colonial situation is, first of all, military conquest continuing to reinforced by a civil and police administration. So everything after conquest is just the administration of conquest. That's it. That's all we're talking about. So there are different administrations, right? Like just like in any settler colonial state, there are different people who are president who have maybe tinker on the margins of policy, or they might have a little bit more welfare than the next one or whatever, but it's all an administration of conquest. Like, and that's the basis of it. And that's it. So anything that doesn't start with that gets into, well, yeah, they stole shit, but it's like, no, this is still all stolen. This is still conquest. And it needs to be clear on that. And again, anything else is just navigating that. Like I said, we have to do to ultimately get free, but it should not be confused as the freedom just because you have to. So if Black people for a moment left the South because it was bad and eventually had to come back because it was bad elsewhere too. So it's like if Black people left the South momentarily, it doesn't make America or the North some redeeming quality. It's just like we have very slim pickings. We're always fighting with crumbs. So if I could live a little longer here, then I'll go here. If I can get a little bit more happiness here, then I'll go here. But it's still the colony. That's just
the reality is
clear.
We run it everywhere we are.
Yeah,
we run it everywhere we are, and that's another thing that came up in that conversation because he talks about for us to accept that there is some major distinction between the way Canada engaged in settler colonialism versus the way the U.S. engaged in settler colonialism is to accept these imperial geographies, right? And so the idea about rejecting them, and this might be a whole other thing, right? But like I know often people will ask, if I've done a DNA test and I've not done a DNA test, but I'll tell them, I'm not interested in doing a DNA test.
It's
and
funny.
Then people ask me,
sorry,
I'm from Africa, period.
We just did a Black Myths on that, like actually dropping this week. But
I don't care you with your nerdy selves.
Yeah.
Oprah said, I feel like a Zulu. Shut up, Oprah. It's your goofy ass. You just got a school in South Africa. Like, what is you talking about?
That didn't even do what anyway. And but one of the reasons why, I tell people I have no interest. Not no interest. I don't need to know. And I don't need to know where exactly I'm from because I am an African. And the reason why I say that is because that's not to say that what has been culturally determined to be ethnic groups and ethnic distinctions don't have their own importance in relationship to the people who belong to those groups. But however, I don't need to know whether or not my ancestors came from somewhere in Nigeria or Cameroon or Angola or wherever they might have come from. What I know is that I am a product of this experience that created this larger structure. Right? And so for me, continuing to do that type of work is continuing to buy into these imperial geographies. And I think that that's the same thing that we see in the context of the Americas. For people who their ethnic belonging means something to them, I think that you can hold on to that, and you can hold on to your own ethnic belonging without engaging in ethnicism, right, or a type of tribalism that doesn't do the work that we wanted to do. But for me, I don't have that context. I don't need to know those things, because that is one of the many ways that these imperial geographies are maintained and enforced and reinforced, because people continue to hold on to this claim that they are from some place that didn't exist as we understand it prior to these colonial imperial.
I think that so part of what I'm thinking about, and where I want to stress historical and contextual specificity without higher, like better or worse, is because what we also don't want to do is map the way that the West has operated historically onto places like China, for example, or Russia. So we hear all of this talk about autocracy and Chinese imperialism and Russian imperialism, because we're operating through particular types of logics that are or practices by the West, and assuming, and because things like, it's like they say, if the only tool that you have is a hammer, everything will look like a nail. And we assume that because other countries are, we map on a Western logic to what other nations are doing. And this is not to absolve them in any way, but to say, like, what we're not saying is that everything is imperialism, everything's a colonialism. Therefore, all geopolitics, there's no sort of meaning to geopolitics. I just want to throw that out there as well, because we don't want our words to be used to legitimate, the condemnation or the scapegoating or warmongering towards other sites, because it's like, well, everybody's imperial. Well, everything's imperialism. And the distinctions don't matter. That's not what we're saying.
No, I mean, to respond to both points, I mean, like, no, it's a both and. So you definitely have to specify, like, okay, what the situation is, and we need to understand its internal makeup. Like, we need to know what that is. Like, if we're in America, if we're in Latin America, if we're somewhere in Europe, like, we have to understand the internal makeup of that. Because even if your ultimate goal is to remove it from the equation, you have to understand the makeup of it. If you don't understand that, if you think everything is the exact same, and there are no different contradictions anywhere you go, then you're gonna lose. Because you simply can't. If your goal is actually attack that, you can't attack something when you think everything is the same. Even if we're all playing the same sport, we don't play it the same exactly. There's different styles and ways that things work. So it's important to understand that. It's just, again, that shouldn't be misunderstood as it being better or worse. It's just different. It just has its own makeup. So because you can't, even with colonialism, and we've seen with this kind of evolution, it has to grant certain privileges here and there to even maintain its existence. So different colonies made different decisions on how they wanted to do that. So there's going to be parts that might seem good, or, on the surface, or seem like they're okay, relatively on the surface, because they had to concede that to keep this going. If everyone was under just complete and total annihilation every day, that leads to revolts. That leads to, that's expensive, so, like, it leads to internal wars. So you have to have ways to kind of, like, put people down, and also give them a little modicum of hope at the same time. Like, that's how they've always operated. But I think it's just easy to confuse that as quote unquote progress, whatever. And there is no progress in the colony, like, but the progression of things, like, consistently pushing this, like, okay, you got this, you got that. It continues to just sell this narrative that this thing can be reformed. So we have to understand the specificities, but never let those specificities define the entire thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that's the difference between, like, coercion and hegemony. Like, hegemony is real. Hegemony is, like, the getting the consent over time through, like, I guess maybe what Officer would call the ideological state apparatus. But everything is not just, and this is why it can't just be about, as you were saying, annihilation, extermination, and death. Those are like particular functions of colonialism and imperialism and war, but they're not the only thing, and they're not even necessarily, so best or worse is not a good way to look at what it is that we're analyzing and what our experiences of dehumanization are.
Where I think we're all on the same page is that there is absolutely a need for historical specificity to understand the particularities of these cases, but we also need to understand the way the systems of colonialism, racism, white supremacy are operating in all of these different facets, and that it doesn't do the work that we think it does to make these sort of greater or lesser comparisons. That we just really need to be clear about what it means to understand them and to know our enemy. I just wanted Sharice to say period at that point. Okay, cut it off. All right, y'all. So for this week's plant of the day, we have the Dracaena fragrans. So this one is actually a smaller version of it. So this particular plant is, let's see, where can I put it so it's not, this particular plant is native to the tropical regions of Africa. It's otherwise known as the corn plant, and it's known as the corn plant because when it's not just in this sort of stemming state, the base of it has this sort of thick kind of wooden look, and the leaves kind of look like the leaves that wrap around the corn. But anyway, this is a somewhat hardy plant. This one can be a little bit tricky. As you can see, it just continues to grow from the middle. It can get quite large. It can get up to several feet tall. One of the things that I have found in struggling with this particular plant is that it is hardy in that you don't need to do much to it, but it does definitely benefit from spraying the leaves regularly and a little bit of humidity. So what you'll notice in this one, because it's in my dry kitchen in this terrible weather, is that the tips of the leaves on the bottom, the older leaves, are starting to brown, and that can be avoided by spraying it. And I do not keep up the same kind of plant care here in Germany that I usually keep up with my other set of plants at home in the US. But what that just helps me to think about every day is that we can be doing all right, but then there are some little small extra things that we can do to make sure we continue to thrive. And in this case, it's moisturize. So anyway, that's this week's plant, the Dracaena fragrans.
All right, so for once I'm leading this section. But so today we're joined.
Very loud.
Today we're joined with one of my favorite writers, if I'm being honest. I just discovered him not too long ago, but Black Liberal, Your Time Is Up. That was just classic. But Yannick Giovanni Marshall, he writes in Black Studies and is an assistant professor of Africana Studies at Knox College. He completed his doctorate in African Studies at Columbia, writing a dissertation on whiteness as a police state, and an MA in African American Studies, thesis on subaltern Pan-Africanism at the same university. He has published several op-eds and poetry. Selected writings can be found at yannickgiovannimarshall.net. So welcome to the show, Yannick.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Yannick.
What's up? How are you?
We're a little bit on one today. So
today,
like me always.
Anyway, okay. So a part of what we decided to do was go through a number of your pieces to try to create a little bit more conversational tone. So one of the pieces that I read when prepping for this interview was To Loot a Revolution. And in that particular piece, you talk about the ways our minds are policed and that our imaginations are atrophied, as much, if not more, than our bodies. So what I wanted to know from you is to talk a little bit more about where you get this inspiration where do you get the inspiration to look for a world beyond this type of policing? And what does like envisioning this world look like in everyday practice for you?
So I think, to be honest, where I get my inspiration to think about a world beyond policing is just because I believe that for the vast majority of our time in this Western Hemisphere, we've been subject to totalitarian structures of plantations, etc. And there's nothing really more, like sometimes people fear the totalitarianism that is on its way, but we've actually been through hundreds of years of totalitarianism. And so even though it's totalitarian, we have managed to escape, to find spaces, to run away, to escape the policing structure that is upon us, whether it is by the small moments when we're chilling like away from the master's eye to like leaving or burning the plantation entirely. And so because of that possibility, because my ancestors kind of went hard into destroying the world of the master, that is my people, that is my comfort level, that is what I'm used to, that is my tradition. And so for some reason, I'm curious as to why not that this has been highlighted as part of Black history, but for some reason it's not been highlighted, and it should be highlighted. And it is for the vast majority of Black people's life in the Western Hemisphere and pretty much all over the world, it has been this type of escape from white supremacist power. That has been the rule, not any type of legal structure, not any type of voting, not any whatever they're trying to offer as the parameters that we're supposed to exist within. That has not been the case. And so it's not really so much of a inspiration to look beyond policing. Like, to be honest with who I am and what I'm about, Marinage is the only thing that I know and the only thing that my people know and the only thing that has worked for us. And I have no interest in moving into anything else. Like, I don't trust them, and I don't want to go back near them, and I don't want to be around them, and I don't think that they're going to be better. So the onus is upon them to tell me why I should talk to them, and I don't have conversations, so it's just not going to happen.
Who is them?
Can I ask? Oh, okay.
I use them calculatingly because of how them can change in different places. But them for me at any given moment is anybody that is working towards the anti-Blackness that has made my people suffer for about 400 years. That could be anyone, could be any type of race, any type of political ideology, any type of interest, whatever it is. If you are putting the fetters on by people, or you continuously putting the fetters on by people, then those are the people that I'm trying to run away from, at least run away from.
Do you imagine running away? Do you imagine Marinage? I should ask it in a broader sense. How do you imagine Marinage in its ideal sense? Because I'm thinking about, there's a piece, I do work in Venezuela often, and they talk about institutional Marinage in that case, because of the way the Bolivarian revolution was sort of taken over. But so how do you envision Marinage? Is it sort of within any sort of national imaginary? Are you trying to go somewhere else? Like, what are the ways that you envision Marinage?
So for me, it is a theory and a practice. It's really a political disposition. It is not so much like literally physically relocating, because we are in a totalitarian world governed by imperialist American power. Extradition treaties, AFRICOM, satellite power means there aren't really any spaces, physical locations for us to actually escape and move to another place. So it is really just a position of being away from the parameters, the mental parameters and imagination that is being afforded to us. It is not as if when you leave the plantation and you leave and you go out into the country, you're safe from policing power. But it's still better to leave the plantation. It's just that their policing power is kind of total and almost complete. So you have to kind of exist outside of it. But because it is totalitarian, because we have this situation, for me, Marinage does never stop at the running away. It doesn't, like, it's not just escape. Because the only way that one could be at peace is when the colonizer is off his horse. The colonizer has to be off his horse, the colonizer has to be gone for any type of freedom to exist. And so the Maroon is, as much as the escape and the running away is part of the tradition, the maroon is always coming back. The maroon is always coming back with the fire to burn the plantation, because you can't, running away is not complete until the colonizer is gone. So to complete your escape, you have to destroy the people who are chasing you.
All right, I'm gonna just within the flow of conversation, I'm actually gonna jump questions here because I think what you were saying kind of goes along with my second question on here. So in your piece, I think the piece was called "Their Racist Piece," and you said, "I do not wish them peace. Peace is never peaceful in the colony. The peace of the slave master is not the peace of the enslaved. The slave master finds placid the view of the masses of enslaved people working for him under the whip of the overseer. The enslaved finds peace in the plantation on fire." End quote. And I notice in a lot of your pieces, they're filled with metaphors and they allude to stuff beyond our current popular imagination, and stuff can be left up for imagination since we're on Zoom. So can you articulate like how you develop this approach and why you incorporate metaphors? Because I just noticed, like, even when you're talking about maroons and the way you describe these things, you're using these analogies almost like you're speaking in code in a way. So can you explain that, and also make sure I read my question? How do you incorporate the political into the metaphor?
Well, yes, there has to be a lot of code speaking when everything that you imagine is illegal. Everything that you believe and your whole purpose, your being, is illegal. You are a fugitive, as your basic soul is a fugitive, right? So you always have to be in code. And so poetry, for some reason, has been allowed. We've been able to speak in poetry. We've been able to kind of write our prose. Toni Morrison talks about the 7 days who came and attacked the white supremacists every day that there was a lynching. We can't say that in public, but we can put it into poetic verse and they would somehow accept it. So poetry becomes a language of truth when prose, when actual straight up academic truth, whatever, is barred, is illegal, etc. So poetry becomes more familiar, more useful for me. But not only that, I think just being around poets, being around writing poetry, being interested in literature and all these types of things, art in general, for some reason, and I can't put my finger on it, but there is some type of connection between the cliche and the normalization of the order. And the breaking of the cliche, the disgust of cliches, the moving away or breaking whatever is normal to the radical imagination. Like, when I have a bad line in poetry, when I write something bad and I can tell it gives me the same type of vibe that me accepting the what has been handed to me in terms of what I'm supposed to believe, etc. When I break it, when I have a good verse, when I have a good line, when I do something that seems to approximate a type of truth, it always gives me that escape feeling, that moving away into the radical imagination, that moving apart from whatever is cliche. So for that reason, art and poetry itself is just the language of being free, just the language of escaping. Now, it's that much more important if we have been governed by cliches, if we've been governed by laws, if we've been governed by the parameters of their bland and terrible poetry in their state. What we have to do is we have to use metaphors that we haven't inherited. So when they have given us the poetry, or they've given us the language, or given us the standards to talk about freedom and liberation and moving on their terms, basically, we would have to necessarily break that, because the freedom imagination, our liberation, our types of anti-colonialism cannot be confined in their language, cannot be does not have a useful vehicle in their ways of speaking. And so I do not have the language in colonial language to be able to translate what I mean, other than to move towards the poetic, move towards the art. So it is code, but it's also a necessary vehicle to be able to speak my mind, because there is no language. There's no translation of what I'm trying to say with the things that I've been taught. It just there's no way to be able to impart it.
It's interesting because I think it's in Walter Rodney Speaks, he says that the poet, it's the poet that best understands the metropole, or that best describes the metropole. And I'm not somebody who reads a lot of fiction or poetry or anything, but that gave me pause to think about poetry and to think about like fiction, because it's Walter Rodney, so I gotta do what he says. But okay, so I guess shifting gears just a little bit, but also thinking along the lines of this conversation, in your piece, "The Democrats Will Not Save You," which I think just came out recently, maybe on the 7th. You said if the Democrats are not the lesser, or I guess, the question is, if the Democrats are not the lesser of two evils, but rather are patient with cruelty, as you put it, quoting James Cone, then what is the choice for colonized Black folks in terms of electoral politics, if there even is one? And why do you see the Democrats as particularly pernicious, rich, white, or multicultural politicians that do little to stop the onslaught of would-be autocrats?
I can't help but imagine or suspect that white liberals have made a very easy calculation. They have realized that, wrongly, because Nazis don't stop at the obvious targets of Black people. They target anybody that's not down with Nazism. But they have made a bet to say that we won't be faring too bad in a Nazi takeover and a white supremacist takeover. We won't be in that much trouble. And so the urgency or the threat of white supremacy in its rawest form is never really there for them. Again, wrong, but that's just how it is. And for me, so that is enough reason to realize that if the urgency level, if the crisis level is different, there's no reason to be able to kind of like speak to them or talk to them. So I would be generally opposed to any type of like conversations with them in general. So that's basically it. I believe that their calculation is different than the people who are the first targets of imperialism. Their calculation is just that it makes more sense for me to align with white supremacist forces. They always have the choice to be able to align with white supremacist forces than not. Now, in apartheid South Africa, you had the United Party and you had the NAPS, the National Party. And the National Party was just the hardcore, we're going to do apartheid, white supremacist power, whatever. And the United Party was just like, okay, well, they're a little too bad, but basically we're still interested in the continued colonization of South Africa. Just like in Kenya, you had the settlers just wanted to whip the native anytime that they wanted. And you had the administration that said, okay, you can only whip the native 50 times. Well, yes, there is a difference in whipping the native as many times as you want and whipping them 50 times. It's better for us to be whipped 50 times, but I don't want to be in a situation where I'm whipped. So there is a difference between the two factions of white supremacist parties. And so it doesn't matter who wins election and who doesn't, just by how they can mobilize what tone that white supremacy will take. But nothing that they could ever do will ever be satisfactory for any type of Black liberation. Nothing that they can ever do that can ever be interested in, they can't fix their mind on any type of freedom that is worth our time. And so for that reason, I don't know what the point is in hoping and praying that the united white supremacist party will beat the Africana white supremacist party. They need to do their own thing and go away. I don't know how to put it.
Well, what you're talking about actually is distinction without difference, right? There's really not a difference. There's just a distinction, right? And I guess it's intensity. So then it's like no electoral politics. So this often comes up, right, in the discussion from, Brianna Joy Gray to other conversations that we had. Do we just see the electoral realm? Like, obviously we need to do our own type. So and some people talk about like dual power. Like, obviously we need to do our own organizing, but then do we just see the electoral realm altogether? Because there's something to be said about protecting our shit, right? We can cultivate our shit beyond the electoral politics, but how do you protect it in the colony?
Yeah. So this is like, I've never voted in my life. I don't even know what a voting booth looks like. I've never had that period in my life that I had that. But I've also not seen any colony doing anything satisfactory for the oppressed people. I've never, ever seen it ever. And I don't like the intellectual resources marshaled towards a more bound cause. I don't like what we have, because it takes a lot of energy to be able to move into that direction and to challenge it in that direction. so that we've been put into that waiting space that's never really threatening to the colony, but just in the parameters in the house. We might move from the field to the house, but the plantation is still remaining. And I can't, it's not as if there's a limited time where we're just all like, okay, in 1,000 years, then we're going to get justice. Like, no, the world is burning, world is on fire. And I feel increasingly that we're being scammed. So it seems, what is just the bet? Let's be capitalist and bourgeoisie for a moment, and let's see what is the investment that you would make. Would you invest in your 1,000 years of waiting, or would you invest in you're doing something fundamentally different to have the best chance you can? It seems even in capitalist logic, you would still make the decision that this is not the good bet. So how much more for people who are targeted by both capitalism and violence would they make a ridiculous bet? It seems if we were to all marshal our resources, marshal our thoughts, marshal our ideas for the cause of our freedom, we might not be shuffled along into that very useful distraction, because it's always in the interest for them to put us into the spaces, the waiting rooms that they have designed. We can be protecting our stuff then, but at the moment that we're being protected, they're still accumulating all of our surplus labor. They're still accumulating all of our resources, our land, our territory, intellectual and otherwise. So all of this continues. It is better. It's a good bet, even if nothing's going to come of it. Be able to kind of say, okay, well, y'all vote if y'all need to vote. But anti-apartheid, anti-colonialism is just most likely going to do something better.
But I just want to say that I appreciate your perspective on that. I mean, because we do have this conversation a lot. And I think, even when we had that conversation, when Breonna Joy Gray was on the show, some of our audience members, even questioned our decision to have that conversation. But I think it's useful. What I'll say is, I appreciate the way that you articulate why you have never invested, let alone need to divest from electoral politics. And I think it's very clear to think about what it means to use up our resources in that way, and that we have so much other work that needs to be done, right? And I think that that's such a clear, concise, and to the point way to think about why not waste our time. So I just thank you for that.
And to just be completely honest, I'm also not. I don't really believe in those type of people who go around and say, "Oh, how can you vote for this person, or how can you not vote for this person?" Because for me, that is still believing in voting. That is still believing in that believes that this is something fundamentally decisive. Escape means the things of the colonizer must be recognized from your bottom to your top as trash. Not, okay, well, you're doing this or you're not doing this, whatever. The entire thing is trash. And until you can actually see it as trash or believe it as trash, you're always going to kind of play around with it. There's no reason to it, because it has not, and this is, I don't like them. You might have probably gathered this. I don't like them. I don't even care if things were going to work out later on. I still would be against them. Like if we were all going to be okay, I still would be against them. But this is not my own personal beliefs and my own passion. It is the historical fact that nothing they have ever done has been satisfactory for our cause. So why you are making an error in judgment, an objective error in judgment, in believing that something is going to be fundamentally different from their trajectory? It can't.
Yeah, I remember when you were on Black Myths, and the myth was Black people died to vote. And I remember you said treat it like going to work. If voting, you said treat it like if you're going to go to work or not on a Tuesday. But that's the most. That's the most, and I say that to people ever since then. I say that to people all the time. Like, that's the most investment, because I think your point, and you can speak to this, was not, like you said, it's not just about whether we vote or not. You felt like the entire investment in the discussion was basically a waste of time. Is that correct? Like, even arguing not to vote, you thought was useless in some ways.
Yes. You cannot. The runaway, the maroon, will not be so invested in plantation rumors and comments. You can't really be fundamentally escaped from that system and still be like, okay, well, what did this person do on Tuesday? What did this person do on Thursday? You're gone. This is ridiculous. Move away from it, burn it down, and then move it. But if you find yourself still, because it's like almost the opposite, it's still not fundamentally separate from it. So if you find yourself like, oh my God, like this is terrible or this is wonderful, you're still locked in this type of box because you're not fundamentally away from it. And I think that energy expended in trying to say, hey, don't vote for this person, how can you vote for this person, is a confession of your attachment to that system. Even through your hatred, your attachment to the system. I am lucky enough to be in a position where I can't even recognize what the point of this is. I don't even understand it. Because for me, if John Chrétien wins or whoever, I don't even know the names of the people that are running things, Biden or whatever, and Kamala or whatever. I don't know what is different, because I definitely know that nobody's going to take AFRICOM out of the continent. I definitely know that it's still going to be shipping their garbage over on our coast. I definitely know that they're going to run the same imperialist war that they are going to. They've always run. So why do I care? I would like them to go away, and if we can spend some time having a conversation. I don't do conversation, but having a conversation about how to get them off of the horse, I find that would be incredibly much more useful than to kind of just fighting in their little small debates.
And they could take Trevor Noah's goofy ass with them.
Yeah.
No, like I just can't think of any better use of the term. We need to disabuse ourselves. Disabuse ourselves.
Yeah, disabuse.
This shit is useful. Yes.
Yeah. Go away.
Yeah, continuing with to come back to some of our questions, continuing with people who are really deeply invested in this process of voting and stuff. The piece Black Liberal, Your Time Is Up. I think you said when we talked once that was the first time anybody really started reading your stuff. Like nobody's really paying attention, and that was the one that kind of blew up. But in that you say, for far too long, Black liberal, you have been allowed to domesticate Black radicalism because our oppressors prefer you to us, and at any sign of trouble, rush out to find you to speak on the behalf of all Black people. You have eagerly taken this chance to hog all the mics and silence us. You weaken our revolt with your narration. End quote. So you wrote this in 2020, and at the time, this is when the streets were on fire, especially much more than they are right now. Now that things have at least appeared to have calmed down, or at least seems like a lot of that energy has been moved into the Democratic Party. Like, I guess some question, like, how do you reflect on that piece now that you've seen that the Black liberals did in some ways win? Like they did narrate, they're still narrating, to your point. And then can you articulate why you emphasize, I know you like to emphasize the importance of theory and ideology. I know that's something you consider a main fight for you with your writing.
Yes. So even in that piece, I was pessimistic. And I had moments to say, in the coming fraud, I expected this to happen. It's not that I'm a freaking soothsayer or whatever, but I can tell that because they own the ideological apparatuses, because it's always old reverend preacher men on MSNBC speaking, and the activists and the revolutionaries are gone, because of this is continuously happening, then we are always going to be at a loss, because they run everything. They run the schools, they run a lot of the families, they run the churches, they run all of the ideological apparatuses, they especially run the media, etc. So yes, for us, that moment was a brief moment in the sun. It was transient, it was always going to be going away, but it was their totalitarian hold on making the Black radical voice invisible was broken for a moment, and it was temporary. But this is why they should see us, because we still exist, even though we are going to be suppressed and repressed again. But they should see us, and we still very much exist. And so I don't believe that it's over, and I don't believe that they've won. I do believe that we've reverted back to, they've just adjusted back to their original forces, and we're now in the position of the movement of position again. So what we need to do is to continuously move and continuously open our spaces as much as possible. In terms of why I think theory is important, the reason that I think theory is extremely important is because we have found ourselves in one of the most powerful ideological systems that has ever existed. Our forces, our thinkers, our people have been, even the lumpen proletariat, have been trained into the belief that any type of radical move or any type of move against the system is operating in patriotic and nationalist and within their parameters. The theory is okay. Well, there's never a speaking about anti-colonialism in the rest of the world, slave revolts. There's always a trajectory from like Frederick Douglass to civil rights to Martin Luther King, all these type of things. And this is, so if somebody is newly saying, okay, I'm not down with this white supremacy anymore, they must go through this channel. So we are fundamentally in an umbrella of thinking that is based on white supremacist ordained legitimate thought. Now, we cannot get into a position of fundamental freedom if they have damaged the entire army or damaged the entire metaphorical army or militant nature of the people, because there is no marshaling alternative force when that alternative force itself continues to work in their trajectory. So you must continuously break the ideological system, and you must take over the mics, take over the ideological system, and build something fundamentally different. Otherwise, the people who are down to fight will have been so abused as to believe that it's not that they believe that I'm only going to color within the lines and walk in the streets and not the sidewalks, is that they have not even had the opportunity to be able to imagine something different because of how total white supremacist liberal parameters have been. So it is not like I am of the tradition of Maroons, and it wasn't a whole lot of talking. It was about burning plantations. But in this situation, we can't even get our runaways to run away because they only can see the margins of the horizon based on the slave master's walls. They can't imagine that there's anything beyond that. And so that is what needs to be broken.
So that's interesting because I want to, my question, I guess maybe takes us in a slightly different direction, which is about perhaps what things we want to kind of put in place. And so in your piece, Out of Pandemic Anti-Blackness, A Case for Pan-Africanism, you make a distinction between what you call a people's Pan-Africanism, I think even a virtual Pan-Africanism versus a traditional Pan-Africanism. So I wanted to ask, what do you understand to be the basis of these distinctions that you're making? And I think even prior to that, in a thesis prior to that, you talk about subaltern Pan-Africanism. So what I wanted to ask is, what work is done and or left undone when in what you call a Pan-Africanism of the everyday or virtual Pan-Africanism, in contrast to what has previously been laid out as what you term a traditional Pan-Africanism?
Yeah, so I probably should correct myself. It's not even that. I wouldn't even consider what has been state Pan-Africanism to be traditional Pan-Africanism. For me, traditional Pan-Africanism has been when those young women were poisoning masters and speaking in languages over the next plantation to poison the next masters. When there were slave revolts from people that were Igbo that was linking up with people that were speaking Tree, etc., to overthrow the slave ship. These are the first elements of Pan-Africanism, where different peoples from different places that were caught in the same situation of anti-Blackness worked together in order to destroy the anti-Blackness power over them. That has been the tradition. And when Haiti is linking up with Nat Turner, etc., all these type of things, that has been the tradition. What has become almost the dominant iteration of Pan-Africanism is state Pan-Africanism, is Nkrumah Pan-Africanism, is the AU and all these other things. Now, I'm not fundamentally against state Pan-Africanism. When there are presidents of countries that are speaking about Pan-Africanism, it's not necessarily bad. If you're trying to link up roads and infrastructure or economies, whatever, it's not necessarily bad. is hard in an imperialist structure, but it's not necessarily the spirit of it is not bad. But I would suggest that instead of waiting for the states that still have prisons, still have police, still do their state things to be able to somehow reach some type of enlightenment and make a useful Pan-Africanism. The traditional Pan-Africanism, the Pan-Africanism of the everyday, Pan-Africanism of two women poisoning the slave masters, two people from different languages going against the slave ship. The Pan-Africanism of the plantation, of the everyday of right now, somebody in Ghana listening to hip hop and using that against China's racism against Black immigrants. All of those day-to-day things that have nothing to do with state structures are a much better resource for us than state structures, I would say.
So hold on. Where does organization fit into all of this? Because it seems to me that sort of one can read that as a sort of individualist or a sort of spontaneous model, which, you've written about anarchism elsewhere. And so maybe that's along the lines of what you're thinking with. But it seems to me that organizations, so slave revolts, for example, were organized, right? And so I just wonder, what is the role of organizations and of organizing in terms of this traditional Pan-Africanism you're laying out?
Yeah, so I cannot understand any type of Pan-Africanism that does not imply organization. That is largely the pan part. That is largely the community part. That's largely the connecting and for a certain cause part. That's what Pan-Africanism seems to apply organization. I do take issue with the understanding of solidarity and working together as organizations, because organizations themselves very often model a type of corporate fiscal order that is very often close to state structures, etc. The reason why it's difficult to see two women poisoning the masses as an organization rather than the BPP as an organization is because of how the BPP says that they are an organization where the two Black women poisoning the masses might not. So there is a limited problem in language in terms of how to understand Black people's actions. To think of the lumpen proletariat's action or the peasant's action as spontaneous when everybody was talking and saying, okay, we're going to meet at this point and burn the masters at this exact time. And do this for these and these reasons, and then we're going to have rumors to be able to feed ourselves together. That, even though it was completely organized, is not understood to be organized. It's considered to be spontaneous. When things that look like having structures and hierarchies, etc., will end up having the label of organization. So for me, the work of freedom always implies organization, but organization and organizations are very different from me. That doesn't mean that I'm against organization, because I am not against large parts of the anti-colonial movements, the FLN, even the BPP and all these other things. I am not against them. I am quite for organizations that are moving towards the end of colonialism. I just feel that in that way of thinking, in the dominance way of thinking of what organizations are, it necessarily makes invisible the solidarities and collective and community movements that cannot really be registered or be legible as organizations. So there is a slight difference. But for me, it doesn't matter. If you're part of the FLN or you're burning slave masters down, let's do it.
But it strikes me that there's also something about power, right? And where and how power is consolidated, because which I wouldn't necessarily conflate what we know to be the AU today and Nkrumah's vision for Pan-Africanism, but one of the claims or the basic understandings was that a part of the reason why, as African descended people, we are in the predicament that we are in both on the continent and in the diaspora, has to do with the sort of lack of consolidation of power as a result of the continuation of what colonization, slavery, all has done. And so attempting to consolidate power and to actually be a force to be reckoned with has a very material impact on what it means to be African people on the continent and in the diaspora. And so I'm wondering how you account for that in the way that you talk about because I think there is use, obviously, in thinking about what that everyday kind of looks like, but then there has to be where is that necessary work that is actually about consolidating power. And I think this is even the question about the nation state, right? Like, as much as there is a desire to move beyond the nation state in a world of nation states in order to be able to amass land and to be able to produce certain resources that are able to help us reproduce as a people, there are certain things that we need to be able to take control of, right? And that in the world as it exists, Africa is the only place where we even have the possibility of doing that, right? So all of those things are kind of at play, and I don't know, what your thoughts are on that in relationship to that first question.
Yeah. So Garvey was like, he wanted an army. We can imagine a world where there's fighter jets with red, black, and green going through the sky, and military formations as a rival to imperialist power. That organization is not only something that I'm okay with, it's something that I dream about daily. I believe that there has to be an organized and rival power to imperialist power in a military-looking way. I believe that. My problem is not so much with organizations themselves or Pan-Africanists or organizations at all. Like, I've been part of quite a few of them. My problem is the way of interpreting Black action and Black history in ways that are legible only to certain structures. So you cannot interpret people that are outside of history. It's just like, okay, people read Black history, but they read certain books, but they're not reading the rumors and the whispers and the unwritten and unauthored books of the people. They only read what is officially stamped as the library. That relationship between the library books and the whispers is a relationship between organizations and Black people's organizing. And so for me, the highlighting and platforming of one side always seems to leave out the actual more successful, less like the BPP did its thing, but it's nowhere close to the revolutions that we had on the plantations, like in terms of the vast majority of all of the Western Hemisphere. Nothing that Black Panther Party did that can rival the vast majority of revolutions that we had that were not considered organizations. So how is it that we still now think more about the Black Panther Party than enslaved people's revolts? It's because of the association with organizations versus the organization or the movement of the people that might not seem to be as regimented, as European adjacent, as traditional in terms of the state structures than other things do. So I am slightly suspicious that our acceptance and happiness with what is understood to be organizations has legacies of European or US-centric influence that works to the detriment of our actual histories and our actual work that we've actually done. This is the subaltern versus the Pan-Africanists. The subaltern peoples will never really be registered because they never wrote any books, and they never really said that we are the subaltern. They were just existing in ways that are outside. So for me, it is an academic question. It is more of a philosophical question. It is something that I've just spend some of my time just thinking, okay, well, just remember there's something slightly off about this, but let's keep on moving. It's not really the first thing on my plate. But in our own circles, I do think that our dependence on these ideas of organization, not so much the organization themselves, but the ideas of organization might be skewed in one direction rather than being inclusive of the actual work that our people have done.
Yeah, but I think this is a productive sort of maybe tension that we've been discussing, and I'm thinking more about it because I also think that even within the context of organizations or in relation to organizations, there's all sorts of other shit happening, right? And that something about the organizational structure allows for shit to happen. So like, the Black Panther Party, they're doing all sorts of shit to raise funds for their survival programs, right? Which to me speaks to the organizing that you're talking about that is adjacent to, but not fully encapsulated perhaps by the organizational structure itself. So it's very interesting. But I think for me, it's important to emphasize organizations because of the individualism and the liberal individualism in particular, and the lack of collective consciousness, just at least as a step, right, toward things that might be beyond a contained by organizational structure itself. But I don't think we're there yet. I think people can't even conceive of joining organizations right now, right? That's when working collectively. And so I think that that's sort of, I'm thinking about the sort of order of operations while I'm acknowledging that all of these things are always happening at once.
Speaking of books, but in Revolution and Evolution in the 20th century, James and Grace Lee Boggs, like both of them, the husband and the wife, they make a distinction between, like, I'm not going to get into the long definitions, but they make a distinction between like revolts and rebellions and insurrections and uprisings versus revolution, and how those are not, they often are used interchangeably, but they're not. And I know specifically about rebellions, they say it often is spontaneous. It is usually a rise against the injustice of the colony or something of that nature. But then revolution is a question of the world we're trying to build and how we're going to carry that on. And I know that, so I feel like the tension here is also like, okay, if you're going to do that, is that through the what does the organizational capacity look like? I don't think we're disagreeing that we need organizations. But as far as like, what does that look like? I guess I'm just curious how to kind of flesh that out, because it's not, I think sometimes it is easy to just look at the plantation burning or the slave revolt or whatever, and those things are necessary. And they also note like that can lead to revolution, but sometimes there's a way these things can replace the thing they burned down if they don't have a vision of what that revolution and the evolution of that looks like.
Yeah,
and I just want to add that is the case that we do see with marriage in a number of instances, right? Like that's what we saw in the case of the Quilombo do Pomares in Brazil, and the agreements that they made with the colonizers in order to be able to maintain their own vision of freedom. They would turn people back over, right? Yep. And so that's one of the things that, like, I think that even around the question of marriage, which I think is interesting and productive, but in the practice of marriage, we've seen some very compromising positions that have been taken.
Some contradictions.
I don't want to make it, so the thing is, I'm not making a claim, a blanket statement about marriage. I'm saying that with the example of marriage, I think is important, and I think it's an important way to think about how we conceive of our pathways to freedom. What we also know has happened in numerous cases of marriage throughout the Americas, the Caribbean, whatever, is that deals have been cut, compromises have been made, and that the way freedom is conceptualized is limited to a particular group, right? And so that's, and I don't know, I mean, maybe in some ways, and maybe that's my idealism about what I think about an institutional or an organizational form of Pan-Africanism, helps us think about that marriage doesn't always. I think it has the potential to do that, but just in some of the examples that I've seen, I think the point that Two Black was raising, we see some of these contradictions.
Fuckery has been afoot.
Has been afoot, and the same thing in Jamaica too. The deal that they made with the slave masters, and so the history of Black freedom, Black liberation, Black escape has not been a history of absolute Black freedom, Black liberation, and Black escape. It has been one that has been connected to the plantation, which is not entirely surprising, but I am not presenting escape and marriage as the penultimate freedom, because if it was, then none of this would matter, because the Maroons would have come and burned down all the plantations and we'll all be free. So there is not any saying that, okay, we've done it and then it's completed and that's it. But on the other side, I do see, it's always a weird situation to be in, because in any other day with any other crowd, I'm not speaking about revolution in these terms. I'm pretty much like, yeah, obviously, this has to be, the entire system has to be removed. But among people that I don't consider enemies, I'm in a whole different position and a whole different place. And so this is why it's sometimes an academic question, but it's something that I think about. And so I worry that what the term revolution has meant is a type of imagining or an escape, or a dreaming of like what is to happen next, that has been given a type of priority that I'm not sure is appropriate or is deserved. Now, I again, in any other world, I'm thinking, okay, yes, revolution, yeah, that makes sense. Pretty much all the revolutions that were Black revolutions, I'm pretty much down with, against slave masters. But it seems there's a culture of revolution. There's a culture of speaking about revolution. And people speak about revolution and the what is going to happen after the revolution more than they speak about war. And that bothers me because we are in a war and people seem to be speaking about the aftermath of the war. And so our mentality should be focused on specifically the tactical and strategic problems that we have at this moment. Um, and I generally not seen people seem to speak about these things as much as they speak about, let's have the vision for the aftermath. You're not getting to any aftermath if you're not out of this situation. And I would love it if in the next 15, 20 years, then the revolution does come and they were all good and all that. But I don't know if I'm going to be seeing any type of revolution that is going to be fundamentally equitable all across the world in my lifetime. So it's none of my business. Let's say my death is none of my business. The revolution that is happening and the structures that are happening is none of my business. Yes, well, I understand the culture to say that it is a guide to lead us into a way. If we don't have it now, we're going to be replicating the same structures. But amongst friends, I will say that I worry that this talk, this focus, is a type of escape valve, a type of release to not deal with the situation at hand. And we seem to be in a fucked up situation. We seem to be in a place where we do not have the upper hand. And it will take quite a bit of intellectual and other work to get into a place where we can have the right, forgive me, the right to be able to start imagining our safe, harbored future. We're not there yet, and our resources must be devoted to that specific thing. And I like to fantasize about revolution, and I like to fantasize about being safe and having a nice family that can walk out anywhere else. But I don't deserve thinking about having a nice family walking around safe if I'm not dealing with the situation at hand. I just can't justify that.
Well, I ain't got no kids. Just kidding. Okay. All right. So for the last question, I want us to think about Africana studies, because we're all in Africana studies, right? And I include 2 Black in that as an organic intellectual, right? But we all came we came through different routes, right? So Layla's trained as an anthropologist and is a Latin Americanist. You are trained as an Africanist, and I have my PhD in African diaspora studies, and I focus on what I just call global America, right? So my locus of enunciation is the US, but it's always with a global framework because bitch Africana. And it's interesting that we were just talking about marriage, right? Because part of the project of Black studies was to have a particular type of space within higher education to be able to do the redistributive work, right? And to link gown and town in a way that it wasn't to burn down the plantation, but perhaps it was to protect a corner of the plantation, to be on guard and be like, come here if you want to, white folks. We dare you, right? That's kind of what, because it's always, the contradiction is always embedded. The academy is the intellectual arm of the state, period. And so what can one actually do with Black studies? But anyway, so I guess the question is, so on the one hand, I want to hear about you as an Africanist in Africana studies because of that longstanding debate. Is it Africa in the diaspora or Africa and the diaspora? And sort of what's your thoughts on that? But also, what do you see as like what is the state of the field and what is the potential of Africana studies as a sort of liberatory or a project of marriage? You know, Moten and them talk about undercommons or whatever, but we can go, we got words for it. We can call it marriage. So like, I just want to think collectively like about Black studies, given all our investment in that project, like broadly conceived.
Collectively, or start with me, or
You run it.
Okay. So I I shouldn't say this for reasons of capital, but I'm probably one of the worst professors that exist. Um, I don't write papers. I don't go to conferences. I don't do any of the things I'm supposed to do to forward myself, and I should, and I'm working on it, but I don't. The reason why I don't is I can't muster the energy to do something that I believe is useless, to say it like that. And so because I literally don't have faith in the university. This is not good, what I'm saying out loud, for a number of reasons. The reason why I don't have any faith in the university makes it difficult for me to say, okay, well, I can actually do something on this side that I can actually see like I'm linking up with people now that I would have not have linked up with if I didn't write the op-ed. I write a obscure article for an obscure journal somewhere that has paywalls to get into and is doing nothing except being discussed around a table that is likely with one Black person. So I don't know what the point is. But I owe my actual bread and butter and survival to Africana studies, because obviously I won't fit in any other place. Like I've gotten fired from every job I've ever had except except scholarship. And my life is funny, apparently. I've been fired from everywhere except Africana studies, because I'm able to say and speak things in ways that is actually permittable. Like I was speaking about the workers' rights and my factory job, and somehow I lost my job. I got laid off or whatever. I could say it in African studies, and I'm not losing my job yet. Of course, I have threatened a number of different ways, and I'm still here. So I believe it's not so much that I believe what African studies can do. I believe it is a place where people who have been marginalized and kicked out in a number of other places can survive for a while they do other useful things. Now, can we work with African studies and try to do something in it? In my experience, I'm confessing a lot, but in my experience, African studies seems to have been governed by Black liberals, and to say nothing of the administration of the university. So I'm already having to fight an uphill battle. But where spaces can exist where I can do my one or two things, and that's wonderful. But sometimes you find like people on the streets, and I was one of them. A lot of people saying that you're a university Negro because you go to the university, and I see that as voting. It's like it's almost as if people believe in the university, just like they believe in because I used to work as a telemarketer, but no one says that I am somehow invested in telemarketing or I believe in telemarketing or I am a certain type of way because I'm a telemarketer. They recognize that as a job. But because of the power, the ideological power of the academy, people will say, I'm a professor, so I'm a certain type of way because I'm a professor. So just like voting, the ideology behind the electoral system and the ideology behind the university work together to kind of have a type of spooky mysticality to the population to make people believe in things that are not the case. So this is more pessimistic than it should have been, what I was going to be at the outset. But because this has been at one level the only place where I have been able to economically survive, and also a place that I am not fundamentally committed to because I can't understand how we can do a thing. Then I don't understand. It's like I would love for it to happen for something to be useful to be made of it, but again, I'm not waiting for it. But if you allow me to be employed or in a country, then I will take it.
Well, I should just affirm that you're in good company in this circle. I don't know how much you have watched the show, but you haven't said it a lot lately, but one of Sharice's famous sayings is it was the Academy or the Pole.
Or the pole. And a BBL is still not out of the question if this thing goes pear-shaped, believe you me. Yeah.
And I think it is something that, and I think I'm similar. CBS has found more success with academic writing. I think I'm similar to you in my, I don't know. I don't even know what it is. I don't know if it's apathy about academic writing or what, but similar there. And so I just do want to affirm that you're in shared company about the way that we feel about it. But I will say though that I do think that the point that you made about being able to exist as this person who does Black studies and have some critique of it is a somewhat unique position to be in terms of an employment position, to be able to have an outward critique of it, and that it doesn't automatically make you lose your job. Now, it might make you lose your job in that 6 or 7 year tenure window, but you might be able to take care of yourself for a few years. And it is something that I've thought about a lot, like what would I do? I mean, I think for me, what Black studies, and I guess for me, it's even less as a writer, but often as a teacher. That's actually what, gives me hope and keeps me in the spaces when I see, when I maintain contact with my students and I see them taking up things that we've talked about in the classroom in a certain type of way, and how they are trying to live their own lives and govern their lives and become involved in organizations outside of the academy, and when they do any kind of labor, whatever type of work that they do, right? So that, I mean, I think there are a lot of places to find use in it. But I do struggle in a lot of ways. But even within the academy, I mean, I'm I guess a Latin Americanist, but the problem with being a Latin Americanist who studies Black people is that you're not really a Latin Americanist. You're a Black studies fellow, which I am a Black studies fellow, but I'm also a Latin Americanist. But people, as long as you study Black people, like that's what you do, study Black people. And I even feel like that about anthropology. Like for me, I have no affinity directly to anthropology as a field. Ethnography is just a method that I use, right? And not even my primary method anymore. So, I struggle with that, but I know CBS, you were having this conversation with Sundiata recently on his show about where the sites of struggle, even within the academy, because I know one of the questions he asked you was about, do we struggle in these Black older institutional organizations, or like, I think the example that you all were debating over was the distinction between ASALH and AIHS, right? Which was a kind of older
dinosaurs versus these new booting liberals.
Yes, right. And what work can be done in any of these places. And Yannick, I take your point about like the comparison between that and voting, right? Like to continue to kind of do this organizing, that type of organizing work in the academy, when it's about the institutions, it does kind of continue to give them purchase in a way that is not always useful for us. I don't necessarily know that I don't have a question to ask that, but yeah, I'm just thinking with you out loud, and again, affirming that you're in good company on that one.
It allows for a co-optation, right? So on the one hand, there is a level of safety, relative safety in terms of what we can do, right? And how we can subsist. But then it also gives these universities, it reinscribes the system insofar as they can take up the Black radicals, right? And then it's part of their clout because they had the DEI to hire these people. And then, they reap the benefits. We don't get paid for articles. We don't get paid for anything we publish for real, except our 38-cent, royalty checks, I guess, for books if you write one. But like, so it does sort of legitimize, right? The academy. At the same time, it's just, I have a sort of love-hate relationship with Black studies. Sometimes I say I'm post-Black studies because of what it was, right? What it was supposed to be in the context of anti-colonial struggles, third world struggles, Black power, and then what it became. But again, that contradiction was banked in because what did you expect? It's the fucking academy, right? So, but to Black, as somebody who's not necessarily one of us, the fucking petty bouge, Africana studies, like, what do you think?
Think about
Black
the whole
studies.
thing, or is there a direct question?
Just Black studies, the potential Black studies, and like perhaps what does Black studies look like if it's not more to the academy?
I mean, I don't know. Like I have the privilege, I guess, if privilege is the right word, to perform on a lot of universities. So I get to be maybe adjacent, but not in it because I'm
university adjacent.
Yeah.
Analogies.
Yeah, I come and I go. I'm a contracted worker at that point, right? Like I'm not don't live there. Black studies, like as I've talked about on this show, probably only on this show, with college I went to didn't have a Black studies department other than a class that was taught by a white woman. That was all we had. So so when we talk about marriage and just kind of the organic intellectual, like I had to become that because I wasn't gonna learn this shit in college, you know, like, and I definitely wasn't learning this shit in K through 12. So if I wanted to engage in this, I was gonna have to do it on my own time, in my own way, with my own style. So I was always skeptical just because of how my experience, honestly, even before I read all these things, I was just skeptical because I always could just see, even as a kid, I could just see how things could get co-opted pretty quickly. Like it's just rather obvious. So I would meet the people in Black studies, the limited people I met, talking about when I was much younger, and they still reminded me of the same folks I was trying to get away from growing up, the church people who had the very like first Black Negro education, you know, Black history. Like they still reminded me very much of those people, and I didn't want to be around those folks. So before I learned about the history of Black studies, this is just, I'm saying that's my experience, just to like lay that out. And as I learned more about the actual like struggle, then it was actually worse because it's like, oh, like, you know, when I learned about, you know, how the people had to go at the cops and everything else just to get this stuff on campus, and then I see like, okay, it's become this, like what happened? You know what I mean? So it's like, even when I have to perform, like some of the worst events, if I'm being honest, are like, you know, those type of events, because it's very, like, it's very much like when I have to perform, they like, we want you to do a positive poem about Black history. Like it's very much in, and I never do.
Is that why you want to invite us? Is that why you want to invite us?
No, I don't have. I don't have any.
Hear the strong Negro poem. What you mean?
Like I don't have a positive poem about really anything. So it's just, it's always weird when I'm brought in to do these kind of, but like as a poet, you could kind of fit in shit because people just hear the words and they don't necessarily catch the message all the time. You can show up and bash colonialism and they're like, you know, right on or whatever because it's a poem. But if you put that in an academic piece, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I don't know if that's appropriate or whatever. So I don't know. It's like, it just seems like in some ways it's, with organizations we were talking about earlier, just kind of tie it all together. I will say this with organizations, I don't think every organization is meant to last forever. And I don't think every organizational formation is meant to last forever either. Because I think co-optation is just a natural outcome of the colony. I don't know if you can necessarily avoid it unless you get rid of the colony like we were talking about at the beginning. Therefore, when something eventually goes down this bureaucratic, you know, sanitized road, it's to be expected. It's you know, so when you say, I think CBA says like being post-Black studies, I get it, because it's in a sense like it's gonna happen. Like in order to even get funding, you know, like I was listening to Gerald Horne earlier, and he talked about even on this show about, he always talks about the Compromise of 1954, you know, and how Black liberals, you know, pretty much took over from there. And one of the biggest compromises was to cut off the international engagement, you know, and be more focused domestically. And I think Black studies went through a similar kind of form where it seems like at the beginning it had much more international engagement. And then it became very focused on this so-called African American experience. And I think once you do that, you know, it leads to what a lot of y'all are talking about.
All right, Yannick, we have kept you. I know it's like post-teaching. I'm sure you want to have your scotch or whatever. I don't know. But so just to wrap it up, any last words? Where can people find you? Where can they find your writing? And yeah.
They can find my writing. I'm trying to maintain my website at yannickgiovannimarshall.net. I'm only on one social media thing, which is Twitter at Further Black. That's the only two things I have. So yeah.
All right. right, y'all, we are back for one of my favorite segments, Classes in Session. And this week we have one of Dr. CBS's students, Jorge Banuelos. Jorge is a first-year doctoral student in the Religious Studies Department at Yale University in the Religion and Modernity subfield. Additionally, they are a graduate fellow with Yale's Center for the Study of Race, Indigeneity, and Transnational Migration. Jorge graduated from Carleton College in 2020 with credentials in history, religion, and Africana studies. His general interests reside between philosophy of religion, critical theory, and U.S. political economy. He explores these interests topically in Black radicalism, political theology, Africana philosophy of religion, and Black spiritual culture. In their free time, Jorge is a jazz drummer and a chronic crate digger. Wait, before we get into the first question, what's your latest crate find?
Ooh, okay. So I found this like dual collection of Sarah Vaughan recordings, which was great. Then I was also able to find a Sylvester original, and I also got a live version of Bitches Brew.
Look at you out here.
I found some really good records.
Hey. I'm like me over here only listening to trap music. I don't know what y'all talking about, but that sounds real dope. So welcome. So, I'm so happy to have you here again. You were on season 1. So, can you just recap for our audience the work we've done together and how that has impacted your scholarly and intellectual development as you've moved to graduate school?
Yeah, so I benefited a lot from Dr. CBS while I was at Carleton. They brought in Dr. CBS my sophomore year, and I immediately did a research fellowship in Afro-pessimism with them at that point. This was before the encyclopedia article that had came out, and it was also before the biography that Frank had put out. So it was kind of like a nebulously defined word. Like there were a lot of things that were being called Afro-pessimism that might not have been. So we were just really kind of sparsing through the literature for that one. Then for the second one, we did archival research that I think became part of Black Scare, Red Scare, if I'm not mistaken. And so we were at the Schomburg Center, and we were looking at the files of Paul Robeson, Doxy Wilkerson, Pettis Perry, and Claudia Jones. And me in particular, I was looking at Paul Robeson, and I was looking at Doxy Wilkerson. And then lastly, I was a frequent haunt in all of Dr. CBS's classes. I took the Black Revolutions on Campus, Black Intellectual Tradition, Black Radical Political Thought, and I think that's it. Yeah, so not all of them, but I got 3 out of the 4, so I felt pretty good about that.
Showing up late with Pop-Tarts and all that.
Hey, I stopped because of the strike. I had to stop. I solidarity with the Kellogg workers, even though I think the strike is done, but yeah, I had to give them up.
You should have gave them up back then, because there was a direct correlation between them goddamn Pop-Tarts and y'all showing up late to my class. But anyway.
But I will say that that's what we do, right? When you're an undergrad and you find somebody, a professor who you like, you continue to find ways to work with them. So kudos to you for that. So we've already mentioned that you started a PhD program in the Department of Religious Studies at Yale. So could you tell us more about, why did you decide to apply to that program and what are you working on?
Ooh, no, that's a hard one. So I would say that when it came time to apply to PhD programs, I really chose between religious studies and Black studies programs. So even though a lot of my undergraduate training was also in history, religion, and Black studies, I just think history as a PhD route was first off just a little too conservative for my taste. And also I didn't want to be in grad school for like 8 to 10 years. So I just thinking about the completion time, it's a little bit quicker to get out with either Black studies or religious studies. Not at all anything about the relative difficulty of each discipline, but just saying that I just knew history wasn't really what I wanted. I'm not going to die for history. So it was between religious studies PhDs and between Black studies PhDs. And what was tough as well was trying to find a program, at least for me, that had the kind of offerings in Black religious studies and also Black studies. Especially because when I applied to the PhDs, I was a little bit uncouth because I didn't have my master's of divinity. I didn't have a master's degree, period. And so it was just really off of just what I had studied at undergrad. And so I think for Yale's Religious Studies PhD program, what I really like about it, first off, is having a School of Divinity on campus. And so I can go get some theological training if I want to, which I do benefit from. And I had a very awesome class with the Reverend Ebony Marshall Turman, which was just, shout out, awesome class, 15 out of 10, just loved it. Great. And then also, I really enjoy having an African American Studies department as well to work with. And so even though just because of pandemic reasons they weren't accepting joint students, I am very hopeful to get into the program at the department at some point. Was another point. Oh yeah, so the last thing was why religious studies. And I think for religious studies, it really speaks to the interdisciplinary nature of how I try to think about things. And I think also that there's something very enabling about the disciplining in religious studies that I found limiting in other departments. Because I think, like, at least for me, I'm able to work in intellectual history in some ways. I can work in philosophy of religion, but I'm also still very much benefiting from things that are coming out in Black studies, critical theory and whatnot. And so I just think I'm able to like really speak to what it is I'm interested in. The latter thing about what I'm studying is a little bit harder at this point because what I did initially say I wanted to come in and study was what I was calling Black secularism, which was thinking about the ways that people have found sort of like, hold up, let me go back. I gotta look back at my notes that I took. Yeah, so the thing I was interested in studying initially was Black secularism, which was looking at the ways that different Black folk, typically folks that found intellectual resource and kinds of religious skepticisms. So things like humanism, free thought, atheism, agnosticism, and whatnot. But at this stage, I felt like it's more useful for me to just sit in classes that I think I have genuine interest in, kind of redefine how I'm thinking about things and come back into what I might study. But I very much do keep the interest in studies, philosophy of religion, and then thinking about political economy, or at least what sort of like political or material things are happening in the world that are also then going to determine what's happening in philosophy and religion.
Awesome. Okay, so what does mentorship mean? Okay, let me re-ask that question. I don't know why mentorship came out like that, but okay. All right. So what does mentorship mean to you? And how did you receive it at Carleton and in other spaces when you were in undergrad? And then are you still engaging with those mentors since you've transitioned to graduate school? And relatedly, what are the questions you're asking to identify a good mentor at Yale? And what does that even mean for you?
So at Carleton, I had a lot of advantage at Carleton College, especially being a small liberal arts. And then the class sizes were great because when you have like 10 or 15 students in the room, you can have, first off, a lot of conversation with the professor, and also the office hours aren't as much of a competition. So I felt like I was able to really benefit from at least the personal experience of a lot of my professors. So I think definitely Doc CBS was a major mentor that I had, just because any question I had about grad school, Black studies, what's happening here, what's happening there, politically what's happening, I could just hit them up and then boom, get the answer I needed. I could pop up in office hours. And then also even to like now, Doc CBS is still a very like respondent, quick person to reach out to. So huge shout out. Thank you so much. Because anything, even like the other day, I was like, I need help finding classes. And they were like, cool, let me tell you first off how you should pick classes. And I know somebody here I can put you in contact with. And those things are very helpful. Other big mentor, I had a lot of mentorship in the religious studies program or department at Carleton as well. So my personal, at least my research mentor was Dr. Lori Pearson. I had a great time working with them on philosophy of religion things and theology things. Also benefited a lot from coursework with like Michael McNally as well, who was a scholar of American religious history and also was very present on like current indigenous struggles as well. And then in Black studies, also it was a lot of cool people that were working in Black studies as well. In particular, I got a lot of mentorship from like Dr. Thabiti Willis as well, especially with the year that I was working at Carleton, just asking grad school questions, thinking about like, how do you maintain thinking about the continent in a very robust way with other things as well. Also trying to identify journals and whatnot. I ask a lot of questions. And so people who are just willing to answer the questions are really good. And also I have to give another shout out to Doc CBS for also not being afraid to reach out and ask random questions of people. Because a lot of times there are people that are just very generous and willing to answer the questions. As long as you're respectful and you expect, to maybe get a response in like 2 to 3 weeks, but I mean, still it's appreciated regardless. And for a mentor at Yale, it's easy, but it's hard because there were a lot of people at Yale that I wanted to work with. And so just having them also be very receptive and happy to work with me was really good to begin the relationship. But also it's just conversation partners at this point too. It's a really weird stage in the career where I move kind of like from not just student, but also student and future colleague. And so I'm thinking about like, who are people that we can have really engaging conversations with around a certain number of texts or also like a set of intellectual questions. And then also just do we get along? Because I mean, I like to have fun, I like to laugh. So I need other people who are cool, that like to joke, like to have fun and whatnot as well. So those are really the things I look for in a mentor is, are we cool? Do we get along? Are the vibes right? And then also, do we have like very productive conversations?
You got to be
So do
careful
you
with
get-
the cool thing, you know, like being cool, like your mentors can be friendly, but they should not be your friends. And so like I've just, especially younger people like me and Layla, it's like we have to have very strong boundaries around kicking it. You know, that's my perspective. I don't know, Layla, you can chime in on this, but it's
Well,
like,
you know,
I'm not trying to be friends with no students. That's my perspective. Like we could be cool, but like friends, nah, it's not me. But
yeah,
yeah.
my perspective on that is a little bit different. I was actually gonna ask that. I mean, you know, we will have her on the show, but we had her on some other stuff that we did. Like one of my mentors, Bayin Muhammad, you know, I met her when I was 19. I'm 35. Here we are 16 years later. She's one of the people I'm closest to in my life.
But did you guys have that friendship relationship initially, or did that develop over time?
It started very soon, very, very soon.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I remember babysitting her kids when I was early, and but I've always had relationships like that. Like even my two students that we had on, like Chloe came to my mom's funeral. Like, you know, like all, you know, so I don't know. So that's what I was actually going to ask that, you know, in terms of style. I was going to ask you, Jorge, a little bit about CBS's mentor style and how it worked for you, mentorship style and how it worked for you.
Yeah, I think it worked too, because I feel like what I hear from Doc CBS is just a very strong set of professional boundaries, which I completely agree with, because I think boundaries keep everybody safe at the end of the day. And especially in like graduate relationships, I have heard horror stories of people that are having like really weird relationships, weird entanglements, to borrow from Jada Smith, the entanglements and whatnot. But again, I mean, boundaries. So it worked out perfect, because again, cool just in the sense that I get along, we're having a good conversation, and also just someone that you feel like you're not bugging as well. But sometimes people give off that energy that they have better things to do, and that's not you. And so I just feel like for people, if that's the energy, I just rather move on too. So that's kind of what I meant by that.
Yeah. So for example, like when I took you and Kat to New York so that we can do our Schomburg research. If we did not have good boundaries, we all stayed in the same Airbnb. Obviously, everybody had their own room, but if we did not have good boundaries, I would not have felt comfortable doing that, because things just get nebulous, right? And so especially, and then I think it's even more tricky at the graduate level, because you're much closer in age, right? Especially where we are, Layla and I are in our careers. And so at the same time that I think the friendliness is important, because your graduate students or your mentees are not your slaves. They are not your, you know what I mean? You're not their fucking master. These are not your minions. Like, they are people. They're burgeoning knowledge producers, right? And so I think that having a level of respect is important as well, which can be missing from some mentor relationships when, you know, especially more senior faculty just want to dominate. You know, they feel like they have all the teaching to do and you have all the learning to do, as opposed to it being a sort of mutually kind of supportive relationship, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, when you were talking, Jorge, about the fact that Dr. CBS, you know, pushed you to just randomly reach out, like I can attest to that from our own horizontal mentorship. She's constantly just trying to push me to reach out to people, which is not really my, you know, like, and I guess that is, you do, when you have relationships with mentors, you also have to understand people's relational styles, right? And so I guess the reason why, for me, I've had closer relationships with my mentees is because of the way I relate to people. And I typically don't ask people for things that I don't have a relationship with, right? And that's something that you have to learn to get over in the academy. And so I can imagine that being a very useful skill that she offered you.
Sorry, one more follow-up thing. You did the research program at the Schomburg in, when was that, 2019, 2018?
2019, yep.
Okay, so have you kept in touch with any of those instructors or any of those people from that program? And do you have not necessarily a direct mentorship relationship, but maybe advising or some other relationship that you've maintained?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's cool. Actually, matter of fact, I'm at Yale with two other people that I did the program with. So one of them, actually, they're both in American Studies. And American Studies is another great department. So that's cool. That's one level. And then I have other friends that are working at different schools. So like I have a friend working under Robin Kelly right now, Desmond, very cool in contact with. I got friends at UT Austin, Columbia, it's University of Pittsburgh, and I think one in South Carolina, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a good network for keeping up with people. the mentors, you know, they're kind of in the junior faculty stage, so like they're transitioning. Like one of them just had a kid recently, and so like it's cool, it's all friendly and whatnot, but then also understandably life happens, and so you can't expect to like get the same level of contact that you had at one stage. But I mean, it's all goodwill across the board, so I mean that's really what matters.
So we already talked about, you know, sort of where you are, but what has it been like then to start a PhD program in a pandemic? And, you know, I imagine, you know, we've all been dealing with our own issues in the pandemic, but starting a PhD program is hard enough as it is when shit is quote unquote normal. And then, you know, doing one in a pandemic has to be really interesting. And then, you know, other than that, do you have any advice for folks who are applying to grad school now under similar conditions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard. I can't exhaust how hard it is. It's not like difficult. It's not like, oh my God, it's horrible, but it's just really hard. Because I think, like you were mentioning, Dr. Brown, like it's just hard doing graduate study in general. Actually, I was having a conversation with, I think it was Dr. Nicole Turner that I took this class with. And so we had like a weekly reflection, and I had mentioned in one of my reflections, like, first off, it's hard having to sit here and always ask yourself, like, dang, I just read this book I didn't know existed. The idea I had was just done expertly by this person. So now where does that leave me? Having them kind of conversations, but then also like just the wherewithal of so much reflexive thinking that you just don't really have the time to do elsewhere. So I think that aspect is hard, but then also thinking about like Omicron or Joe Biden, like I'm sorry. Cut that. I was finna start talking trash on Joe Biden, but let me move on. But
fuck Joe Biden. Do you watch this show?
Because I was just saying. I mean, sometimes I watch Joe Biden, and I'm like, he kind of, to me, he has Alzheimer's. So like, I don't know if he's coming to go or if he knows he's coming to go. And so sometimes when people are making them kind of decisions, and you just feel like an overwhelming sense of incompetence from the people who are leading things, you're just like, oh my God, things are finna get worse. So that's hard. But I think another thing too is that it's also good because then I've been able to lean on my cohort. Like me and my cohort are very cool. I think they did a bang up job accepting the students this year. Like everybody's cool. I get along with everybody in my cohort, which is rare. And so we have very good conversations, very good support network. I would say that's probably where I would begin my advice for people who are looking to do graduate studies is how identify a support network both in and outside the university. Because again, especially like shout out to Fred Moten, you want to be in the school, but not necessarily of it. And so having people on like both levels kind of keeps you like, I know what to do to be here, but then also I have other people that are doing other things in their life that I equally respect and value. So let me also, you know, be in support and support them as well. I would also say think very hard about why you want to do graduate studies. Like, do you just feel like that's the next stage that you want to do, or do you actually have like a clear purpose and a clear thing that you're interested in? And then also when things get hard, where's your motivation going to come from? And to think about very seriously about where that motivation comes from, because you're going to need it. Period. You're going to need it. This last finals, I had like 60 or so pages to write. And at one point I was like, let me give up. They messed up. They should have admitted me because I'm not going to do this. But then I was like, no, let me sit and think about it and then get the work done. So that's just one example. Like, it's just gonna be things you never thought you were gonna do. I never thought I was gonna write 60 pages in 2 weeks. But I did it. So be ready for those kind of things as well. And also just some of the raggediness of being at some of these schools. Like Yale it's cool on paper, but like when you get here, it kind of really sucks. And I say it sucks because when I first came here, I noticed there were like not one, not two, but 3 police departments. There's a very parasitic relationship with like Yale, the university, and like New Haven, the town. And so also just take those things into consideration. That when you're there, if you're really bugged by like seeing anti-Blackness or people who just don't get it, like those things are also going to weigh on your mind, in addition to the studies, in addition to the pandemic, and in addition to also just being a 22 or 23-year-old at this stage in life too.
Yeah, assuming that you go straight
talking
through.
To a CBS mentee. You know you're talking to a CBS mentee when they start calling shit raggedy.
Period. Yeah. Yep. And also 60 pages in 2 weeks. That's 4 pages a day. You got this. Like, come on. That's 4 pages a day. Period. Period.
Yeah, I mean, I did it, but I don't mean I want to do it.
All right. Well, break it down into see. This is why I'm doing coaching, so I can help y'all. Like think like just that's 4 pages a day. You can do that. You watch 4 hours of Netflix. You can write 4 pages a day. Anyway, Okay, so what you were just saying, in terms of thinking about surrounding conditions and the actual, the material realities of being at Yale, feeds into my next question. What types of organizing or activism are you doing at Yale, in the sort of surrounding New Haven area or elsewhere? And how do you balance this with your scholarship, or how do you see this as sort of synergistic with your scholarship?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'll definitely be the first one to admit I have been a bad citizen. I've been a bad civic person since I began my PhD. I've had a lot of things happening in my personal life that has kind of taken me away from organizing, but there were a few things that I did try to get involved with very early on that I do hope to progress with further. So, like, first identifying like democratic socialists on campus, just trying to find other people with at least left-leaning politics. First off, was kind of hard because Yale is like a big CIA recruitment place. It's a huge ties between like Yale and the military that are kind of like under wraps, or not necessarily under wraps, but just not overly advertised. Then also there was a movement to try to get cops off of campus that was kind of transpiring before I got here. But then just with like the pandemic and just the strain on people who are organizers as well, like it's kind of bubbled down. But I am hoping that ramps back up and I can be part of it. And then earlier when I first arrived at New Haven, there's this union. It's a joint effort between both the graduate students and people who were like workers at Yale called Local 33. I'm a member of the union. I participate in a few union events, but then again, it's kind of been a little bit slow, a little bit tricky, because especially with things happening in like Columbia and Princeton, for example, Yale is acting in a way that they don't really want the smoke. So like, for example, they sent out just sort of like a under the table increase in stipends and whatnot, hoping that things don't happen. And so I'm hoping we push a little bit more, but again, some of the meetings just they're not happening at the point, but I'm hoping they do pick up at some point. And the last thing I really do want to get involved with as well, that I'm hoping to do this term, is more with like the Yale Prison Education Initiative. So they have a program where there are graduate students who also teach, but then do research with people who are at like some of the local prisons in Connecticut. And I think they actually now have an accreditation program as well, I think through the University of New Haven, but not Yale. And so I am hoping also get involved with that later on as well.
Excellent. Keep your ethics close. Keep your ethics in mind when working with prison populations, that they should be benefiting from the relationship just as much as you are. Otherwise, it's just extraction. So keep that in mind always.
Okay, so for our final question, let us know, what are you reading right now? What's moving you? What's exciting you? What's helping you think about the questions you're contemplating in the world?
Ooh,
not skimming, reading. We literates over here.
Some books. So this one right here, Professor Carla Holloway. I read this in a day. This was a very good book. I cannot say enough good things about Passed On. I was on the Amtrak. Like I said, I ate the whole book in the day. It was so good. She does sort of like a review of Black funerary practices coming out of like the Reconstruction period. And then also just a lot of stories about like death and death intimacy for people who were Black. And so thinking about it just historically, but then also conceptually as well. It was just excellent read to read. Another book I find myself coming back to a lot. This one. Caliban's Reason by Paget Henry. It's kind of tough. It's a little dense at some spots, but the more I read it, the more I get out of it. And then also it's excellent. Really good book. Very good book.
If you want to talk to him, let me know. You know, he's one of my homies. You know, I'm connected with all the CPA.
I need to read some more, but
say less. Say less. Say and do it soon because he's old. But yes, I will put you in contact.
Also recently just started Elizabeth Hinton's America on Fire. I haven't got too far in it yet because I got it's one I'm reading on the side outside of coursework, but I started that one. It's been pretty good so far. Also, I'll
send you my review. I did a review on Black Agenda Report of that one, so I'll send you my review. Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. I read this one on occasion as well. The other way that you know you're one of Doc CBS's students is having this, even though this was a gift from another one of my mentors in Carleton. Shout out to Bill. And then I think the last book I read that was also really good was Talking to the Dead by Dr. LaRonda Manigault Bryant. Not only did she restore my faith in ethnography and anthropology as a method, but it's just really good. So she does like a sort of like intimate 2-year relationship with Gullah Geechee women who were living in the Low Country. It just really, I can't describe it better than you would get from reading it. So I would just say definitely pick it up. I think it's free on JSTOR. And what's cool about it too is that having physically been with people who are Gullah, she was able to record different worship songs that they would sing at services and there's a SoundCloud file that comes along with that book. So while you're reading it, you can also listen to them sing, and it's just a good kind of mixed media reading experience. Yeah, I think those are definitely the books. I think the last one I would say too is I read A Sense of Brutality by Carlos Sanchez, phenomenologist. Really good book. And actually, I have something coming out on that pretty soon, so that I'm very excited about. But I would highly recommend A Sense of Brutality as well.
Okay, all right. So before we get out of here, is there anything else you would like to share, and where can people find you on social media?
Ooh, yeah, on social media, I become something of a ghost. So I realize in this stage of life where I need to be more quiet and stop saying things and stop speaking so impulsively. But I still am on Twitter. I'm just a lot more quiet on Twitter. Yeah, I would say any last words? Have fun, listen to music, please watch the news. And listen with intent. Like listen to music with intent. I would say that's one thing I've really enjoyed recently is like getting back into music, getting back into drumming, trying to like find more vinyl records. And I think there's something very meditative about very intentional, serious listening practices. And also something very deeply spiritual too, because there's a reason why music is very connected to worship practices, and also why there's something just so spiritually fulfilling about hearing things that sound really good. So those are my last messages.
Thank you. Well, I am so proud of you. I am so looking forward to all the work that you produce. Can't wait to have you back again. And thank you so much for being here with us again, young Jorge. We look forward to seeing what you produce.
Thank y'all. And thanks for having me as well.
All right, y'all. So I'm gonna do something a little bit different this week. I've decided that I'm gonna alternate between my rants and some writing reflection, because I really enjoy speaking about writing, and I am one, as you know, somebody who is in the process of developing a sustained and ongoing writing practice. And I just say I always got shit to talk shit about every week. So this is the first little installment of Reese's Writing Reflections. And part of what I'm thinking about this week is like, what genre of writing do we choose and why? So there's all different sorts of venues, if you will, that we can write through. So whether it's a monograph, and a monograph is not just a book. A monograph is any sort of single authored form of writing, but it can be a sort of article. It can be a blog post. It can be a book. It could be a pamphlet. It could be a fact sheet. It could just be like a list of things. It could be a stream of consciousness. And so I'm thinking about that because, I had tweeted about this, that by this stage in my career, I just knew I would have like at least two single author books, just because I had so many ideas. I had already started writing a whole different book that's separate from Black Scare, Red Scare during my postdoctoral fellowship in 2016. And I just thought I would have two published books by now, but I don't. And what I just found just through my practice and my experience of being in academia is that I really enjoy, or I really prefer, the article form, because I think an article allows me to work out an argument in a set number of pages or words. And like that is just easier for me. It's something that I enjoy. It allows me to draw on sources in the way that I want to. And so people were telling me, and I just struggle with writing a book more than I thought I would, because I didn't struggle that much with writing my dissertation. But, people were just saying, a book is basically a set of articles. And that's kind of true, but it's also not, because you're sustaining an argument, a linked argument, over 200 or 300 pages, however long the book is, which is different than a simple set of articles, which is basically relatively linked but siloed arguments, if that makes sense. And so instead of having two single author manuscripts or single authored sort of monographs, I have a co-author book. I have a whole bunch of articles. I have some edited volumes that are coming out. And what I've discovered is that I really like working collaboratively. I liked, putting together the edited volumes. I liked sort of co-authoring different journal articles. I liked co-authoring the Du Bois book. And so I guess the upshot of all of this is just to think about not only what ideas you have, but like, how do you want to deliver those ideas? And part of that relates to who is your audience, and how do you want that piece of writing or that set of ideas to circulate? And so this is just something that I've been thinking about as I continue on, right? As I move to different levels or different stages in my career, but also as I think beyond sort of academia and what the requirements are for tenure and promotion. It's like, how do I want to write? What do I want to say? And, in what ways do I want to say it? So that's just, that's my writing reflection for this week. Maybe really think about and consider how it is that you want to deliver information, and how that form of delivery or how that genre will reach the audience you want to reach. All right, y'all. So before we get out of here this evening, there's just two things that I want to say. First is make sure you catch the replay of the Black Alliance for Peace event, Black History as African Liberation, hosted by our very own Two Black and featuring the editors of Hood Communist. It was a wonderful discussion. You definitely want to catch that. So make sure you go to the Black Alliance for Peace website and check that out. And secondly, I did want to shout out that 2/17 is Huey P. Newton's birthday. So happy birthday to Huey P. Newton. But even bigger, even more momentous than that, 2/18, Friday, the day you are watching this, is my beloved Patricia Rodney's birthday, okay? Happy birthday, Mama Patricia. I love you. Thank you for everything. And make sure you check out her writing. She not only her monograph or her single author book, but also her many articles. And so, yes, I just want to lift up Mama Patricia Rodney on this very special day.
And that is a great way to end the show. So that's our show for this Friday evening. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you chose to be here with us. So thanks as always for tuning in. I'm Dr. Layla Brown here with my girl, Dr. CBS. Thanks as always to Two Black in the Back. And we're signing off. See you next week.
Peace.